Hello and welcome to the Climbing Daily Friday Gear Show. Today we're going to be looking at the mysterious world of low volume or women's shoes and hopefully answering some of your questions about what they are. Now Unparallel are sponsoring this show and we're using their new TN Pro LV as the main example. LV stands for low volume, an idea that should suit women's feet, and there are considerable differences between men and women's feet, especially in the arch, the first toe and the ball of the foot. LV feet are usually narrower, they're lower volume, and the last of the shoe needs to be changed to suit that. Also, some LV climbers tend to be lighter. Their weight doesn't work for the normal compound of rubber and they need that compound to be tweaked to get the same characteristics. So this is the new TN Pro LV and it's based on the TN Pro. This is Tomoe Narasaki, World Cup and Olympian legend's own signature shoe. Unparallel have worked with him to design an indoor-specific model that excels at competitions. The LV version takes everything from the normal TN Pro, but it changes the last and the composition of the rubber to better suit LV and women climbers. Okay, so if this represents the pinnacle, the modern example of an LV shoe, how did we get here? Let's start at the beginning. The first incarnation of modern-day climbing shoes as we know it now was in the late 50s and 60s with the emergence of the climbing company EB and the Super Graton. Before this, the most common shoes used to climb were nail-spiked boots. Those pioneers were crazy. During the 80s, numerous other climbing shoe brands evolved, which began to push the industry towards what would become the modern-day climbing shoe. However, it wasn't until 1997 that we saw the very first women-specific climbing shoe, in the form of the 510 Diamond. Terminology is important because there seems to be a 50-50 split on what brands are actually calling LV shoes. Some go with LV, while others describe it as a women's or even unisex model. Now, we have chatted to brands about this, and the rationale tends to be that for LV shoes, women are the biggest end user group for that model, and that's why they call them women's shoes. However, men can suit LV or women's shoes just as well as women. If you're a lighter weight perhaps, or you have a thinner, narrower foot, then don't discard a women's shoe as not for you. It actually might suit you really well. So that's the general overview, but let's get more specific and find out what Unparallel's angle on this is. We got one of their designers on the phone. So I've managed to get Pierre on the phone. Pierre, thank you for joining me here today. First of all, what is your job role at Unparallel? What do you actually do there?
Hi, Matt. I'm the creative director or designer, basically, working for Unparallel. Is it for climbing, but also biking shoes?
Awesome, man. Well, look, we've been chatting about low volume or women's or unisex or whatever you want to call them. What is Unparallel's approach to naming low volume shoes? How do you guys do it?
Yeah, I mean, low volume really came together because there are obviously some people that have smaller feet, but primarily women. So I think that's maybe where the confusion exists. In the end, these are primarily women's shoes. But obviously there are also men that, would like to have maybe that shoe for, because they're better fitting for smaller feet. However, the colorways usually are a bit more women specific.
So Pierre, when you looked at designing the TN Pro LV, how do you go about that? Because you've got the TN Pro. Okay, so what do you do to make it into an LV?
Yeah, so making an LV starting is really with the last. The last is the lower volume. Based obviously on our target consumers, and then we have to adapt the shoe also to fit smaller sizes and these volumes. In the end, we need to adapt the proportions, some details, cut lines, obviously the pattern, but also we adapt the rubber slightly, so because there's also, you know, typically smaller people, so they have maybe less weight, and so we adapt the thickness of some of the rubber as well.
And final question for me, what kind of a climber is the TN Pro and the TN Pro LV aimed at?
Yeah, for me, it's a typical, you know, sports climbing shoe. Is it indoor or outdoor? I think that doesn't really matter, because it does have that aggressive downturn. So maybe not ideal for multi-pitch. However, I think, you know, if somebody really does a very technical pitch with some smaller footholds, a lot of heel hooks, I think this will be the perfect shoe.
Awesome. Well, Pierre, thank you for those insights, and I'll chat to you soon.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So we're almost at the TN Pro, but there's a last bit of history to look at, because LV shoes continued to be developed through the 2000s, and 2006 Scarpa released their first downturned aggressive shoe aimed at LV climbers. Now the TN Pro continues with this history to develop these models, the TN Pro and the LV. So let's have a look at both of them and find out what those differences actually are. The TN Pro LV is built on a brand new low volume last. It has the slingshot heel design of the TN Pro, where the outside of the heel is wrapped in RH or Real Honor rubber. This means the shoe is very stable when doing heel hooks, perfect for competitions. There is 3.5mm of RH rubber on the sole. That's compared to 4.2mm on the normal version. This rubber is extremely sticky, but the stiffer midsole and downturn means it's good at edging as well as smearing and on volumes. It's got a more rounded toe than you would expect, and this allows for a certain margin of error when making dynamic foot movements. It doesn't matter if you go for the LV or the normal version, this shoe is going to excel, especially indoors. And if you've got an eye on competing in competitions in the future, well, this thing will have your back. The TN Pro is a high-end shoe. I mean, look, it's designed by Tomoe Narasaki. Unless you're pushing your personal limits on hard things, this is probably too much shoe for you. It is beautifully designed and overbuilt, and you can see that comp thing coming through in the size of the toe patch and how good the heel is. Now the LV, well, the whole point of an LV shoe is it doesn't change the characteristics of the original. It just improves it for certain types of climbers. And I reckon Unparallel have got that really right with the TN Pro LV. I mean, you can just see how much it's being used on the circuit to see that it's a successful model. Now don't get confused with all the noise surrounding LV shoes. It doesn't really matter if a brand says LV or women's or unisex, you know now what kind of a climber that's designed for. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, hang on a sec, I'm a man and I've got those characteristics on my feet, well, check out an LV or women's or whatever version shoe. And if you're a woman looking for a shoe for you, LV might be the way to go. Okay, that's given you guys a history and a look at the new model. Do let me know down below if you use LV shoes and what you think of them, and we'll see you soon.